Hello everyone, Darth here, and today I've got a really interesting one for you. We're going to take a look at all the backstory that Star Wars has that is just too crazy to believe. Here's an example. In A New Hope, we find out that the trash monster was actually Force-sensitive, a Diagana named Omi. When she grabbed Luke, she sensed how strong he was in the Force and saw how bright a future he had, so she drug him underwater, honoring him by baptizing him. Okay, yeah, so that's pretty weird, but that's to get the ball rolling. I wanted to start off with one of the less believable ones, so the rest didn't seem so odd. Everyone ready? Here we go. The New Republic knew the First Order was traveling around the galaxy, kidnapping children for their slave army for over a decade, but they had signed a treaty with the First Order, so legally the New Republic couldn't do anything to stop them. This is why Leia formed the Resistance, so she could act when the incompetent government wouldn't. Apparently, it was very common for TK-421 to not be at his post because he was having a torrid affair with another man in an effort to get a promotion. I guess guys can sleep their way to the top too? The Force is constantly speaking through Rey, giving her knowledge without her realizing it, like how she knows the names of every person that has owned the Falcon since it was stolen from Han. But she didn't know that the ship she knew the entire history of was the Millennium Falcon. A lot of people wondered why Kylo decided to play Fruit Ninja with Lor San Tekka's head. Why not just read his mind and then Kylo could see the map? Well, it turns out that Lor had never actually looked at it. He could sense through the Force that it was incomplete and that only a true Jedi would be able to complete it. And speaking of unsolicited probing, ever wonder why Kylo never searched Poe's mind for the location of the Resistance base? Well, his backstory is actually really well planned out. You see, since Poe was always going on secret missions and was always at risk of being captured, Leia decided not to give him any critical information, so all his missions were sent encoded, and he never actually knew the location of the Resistance base. Now, we actually had many hints early on that Finn was Force-sensitive. That's how he knew that Rey was taken to Starkiller base instead of Snoke's ship or any other random destroyer. Ever notice how everyone on Takodana could see the Starkiller base lasers? That was because the First Order engineers had actually developed a new space-time physics-breaking technology, so that everyone on every planet could see it destroy Hosnian Prime, which was an intimidation tactic. Now, if you're an observant viewer, you'll have noticed that in one scene, Kylo is on the bridge of a destroyer, watching Hosnian being blown up, only to suddenly in the next scene be on his personal ship landing on Takodana. Now, that was another hint the filmmakers gave us at the previously mentioned space-time physics-breaking technology, as our perception of the characters is skewed. And you may ask, if Kylo was just on the destroyer in orbit above Takodana, why did they have to run away when just a dozen X-Wings showed up? Well, the backstory is that Palpatine actually called that destroyer away because of a really fascinating side story that's better left for another time. Then there's this time when Poe went out to recruit Maz for a mission, only she's at a resort getting a cat poop facial. Then she knocks him off of his feet and stands naked on his chest. I've heard many people ask why Finn knew about Starkiller Base but didn't warn anyone until after it blew up the New Republic. Well, that actually is part of his backstory. See, remember how the clones all had inhibitor chips implanted in their brains? Well, the First Order troopers had them too. So Finn wasn't actually physically able to divulge any information that the Resistance didn't naturally learn for themselves. Remember how Palpatine tells Kylo that he has been every voice inside his head? But Snoke was a real flesh and blood person. Well, it turns out that Snoke was a failed clone that had escaped Exegol, and was discovered by General Hux's father as he was trying to cobble together the remains of the Imperial fleet. They made Snoke a figurehead leader to try to inspire the war-torn Imperial remnants, but he eventually wrested power for real once he learned how to harness his Force abilities. Now, one big plot hole that people harp on is Rey knowing Han was real, but thinking Luke was a legend. Well, this is actually really brilliant foreshadowing because Luke has cut himself off from the Force, so this is Rey innately feeling like he's not real, since the Force connects everything. Next, Jakku. Ever wonder why they put such a strong emphasis on that planet in Episode 7? I think they said that planet's name more in a single movie than any other planet has ever been named in all of Star Wars. Well, there's a good reason. That was the writers hinting at how important the planet itself was from a great battle between the Sith and Jedi in the days of the Old Republic. The biggest hint was talking about how Anakin could use the Force as a child, but Rey didn't even use the Force until she left the surface of Jakku. That's because there was a strong dark side presence on that planet that suppressed her abilities. Did you ever notice how the First Order is a small remnant of the Empire, but it has bigger Death Stars and Star Destroyers than the Empire had at the height of its power? Well, that's because Palpatine was secretly moving resources for decades into the Outer Rim to build Starkiller Base. Palpatine was also at the same time secretly moving resources out to Exegol, because he had seen the future and knew both Death Stars and Starkiller Base would all be destroyed. His entire life was working towards this final order. He viewed the Empire and the First Order as kind of practice runs. Did you ever wonder how Finn was trained as a janitor, yet knew exactly the weak points of both Starkiller Base and Snoke's ship? Well, that's actually part of his backstory, that Finn was one of the top performers with consistently good reviews, so he was trusted to clean the very high security areas. Did you know that Poe was so good looking that he became a meme in the Star Wars universe, even getting put on recruitment posters and drawing in new recruits based off of nothing but his striking good looks? When Leia formed the Resistance, they were actually still in charge of the galaxy, and the First Order was a small military faction. She didn't name it the Resistance, meaning they were resisting the First Order. She named it the Resistance because they were fighting back against the New Republic and their stupid policies that let the First Order keep growing. In the novel Empire's End, we learn that Snoke was manipulating Kylo to the dark side while he was still in the womb. Leia was able to sense his malicious presence, but she was weakened by the pregnancy and unable to protect the baby, and neither Han nor Luke believed her that anything was wrong. The First Order was first and foremost worried about Luke Skywalker. Crushing the Resistance and destroying the New Republic were secondary concerns, because they knew Luke could defeat their entire army single-handedly, if they let him live. That's why they focused all of their forces on finding the map to Luke, and didn't care about defeating the Resistance on Takodana when all their leaders were gathered together on a single planet. Now at this point, the Resistance also knows the First Order has a new Death Star that can blow up planets from across the galaxy. So many people are calling this a plot hole, asking why the Resistance leaders were so stupid to stay together on a single planet, just waiting for the First Order to charge and fire their weapon again. Some people complain that the whole Maz lightsaber plot was too coincidental, but actually Han nearly took them to Cloud City instead to see Lando. But then at the last minute, he remembered that Lando wasn't there anymore because he was hiding out on the desert on Pasaana. Galen Erso got his thermal exhaust port self-destruct weakness past inspections by overloading Director Krennic's inbox. Galen sent huge numbers of emails asking questions, and he CC'd Krennic in every email, so eventually Krennic got tired of reading what Galen was doing, thus enabling Galen to enact his heroic plan. At the beginning of Episode 7, Finn crash-landed next to the same settlement that BB-8 was in. That wasn't actually an accident, it was yet another hint at him being Force-sensitive, leading him to land near where he was needed. And as a third example, notice how he wakes up mere moments before his ship is swallowed by the sinking sands? According to the official compendium, that was the Force jostling him awake to save his life. Now, something really interesting about the Knights of Ren is that they weren't in The Force Awakens because... Now, some people asked why Snoke was so worried about Luke when all the students Luke trained were easily defeated in a single night by a single student. Luke was obviously a terrible teacher and the absolute best person to raise a new generation of incompetent Jedi that Snoke could easily wipe out. Well, if you look at the Advanced Compendium section, you'll see that it was actually Luke's blood that Snoke/Palpatine wanted, as the blood of the Chosen One would help Palpatine reincarnate himself. We find out later that another reason Kylo doesn't try to read Lor Santeca's mind was because he had discovered that the minds of older people are too jumbled to understand. That's why he invented this special bondage chair that hones his mind-reading powers, and why he only tries to read the minds of young people like Rey and Poe. Did you notice how the Rathtar didn't immediately eat Finn like it did all the other people, because it could sense how strong the Force was in Finn? So it was taking Finn to a private place, where it could slowly extract Finn's midichlorians using its specialized tentacles. Did you notice that they left Chewbacca in the Falcon, but in this shot, we see him coming out of Maz's castle? That's because in a deleted scene, Chewie goes inside to defend Rey when Unkar Plutt finds her, and at this point he actually rips off Unkar Plutt's arms. A huge question people have is, how did Poe survive the crash, survive the sand eating the ship, survive being lost in the desert with no supplies, and get off Jakku, and pass the First Order destroyer without being seen? Well, remember how Han hid Luke inside a dead Tauntaun? It was kind of like that, only more of a desert sand lizard that poachers had caught and were sneaking off planet. People complained about them no longer needing to do calculations when entering hyperspace, but they've had 30 years of technological advancement since Han first warned Luke about needing calculations. According to the text, the computer just registers where they are as they jump to hyperspace, and it does the calculations while flying instead of beforehand. Have you ever heard that Maz had known Han for years, and she had met Luke many times? But she never mentioned having his lightsaber to any of them. She kept it a secret because the Force told her that Rey was coming one day and that she would need it more. We learn later in the comics that Kylo didn't actually kill the students and burn the temple down. Snoke was the one who sent a Force lightning storm that killed everyone. Did you ever wonder how Chewie randomly happened to find Rey when she was with Finn unconscious at the end of Force Awakens? Well, it was actually just a gut feeling that we could probably attribute to being the Force that guided Chewie where he needed to be. You know how we never got the story about how Han lost the Falcon? Well, it turns out he just trusted the wrong parking attendant with the keys. Some people complained that it was too much of a coincidence that the map to Luke, the Falcon, and Rey were all on the same planet, but they were actually all connected. In the first draft of the script, Rey's parents were the ones who stole the Falcon, and they sold it to Unkar Plutt in exchange for him taking care of Rey. And Ochi was the one who had found the map to Luke, but he accidentally dropped it in the sand when he was chasing Rey's parents. Lor San Tekka found it. That's why Ochi eventually ended up dead on Pasaana, and no one knew why his ship was way out there in the wasteland. It's because he had been searching desert planets all across the galaxy trying to find where he had lost the map to Skywalker. So remember how Maz said the lightsaber called to her, not the Force? It turns out this entire scene was actually a trick by Snoke. It actually wasn't the Force that led Rey there and gave her the visions, it was Snoke beginning to manipulate her just like he manipulated Kylo. And notice none of the visions Rey saw had anything to do with her. She wasn't there for any of this, she was seeing everything Kylo had done. And Kylo saw her. This was actually the beginning of Snoke linking their minds. Kylo saw a ghost of a girl out in the rain, and then again he had visions of fighting a girl in the woods. That's why when he heard a girl had found the droid, he was so agitated, because he had been having visions about a girl. Remember how people complained it was a plot hole that Han had never fired a Chewie's bowcaster before? It was actually part of the plot though. Han had always secretly wanted to shoot it, and the Force hinted to him that he needed to try it now because he was running out of time. Remember at the end of Episode 7 how convenient it was when the ground split Rey and Kylo apart, preventing her from making any tough character decisions about whether or not to kill him? Well, that was actually an action of not the regular Force, but the cosmic Force, because it sensed their dyad bond, and knew that was what was needed to defeat Palpatine. So the cosmic Force split the ground between them, sparing Kylo's life, so that he could later get redeemed and become Ben again. People complained it made no sense for Han to go back to smuggling, because he was a known commander with the New Republic, so no criminal would trust him. Plus, the last guy he smuggled for ended up having his shipment dropped and then his whole cartel got exploded. But Han was still able to find clients because criminals had a lot of practice of knowing who was trustworthy. Ever wonder where Starkiller Base came from? Well, it was once a planet called Ilum, which the First Order chose due to its unique energy-transmitting crystalline deposits, also known as Kyber crystals. And according to the Force Awakens novel, it wasn't actually using the sun as power, it was absorbing the dark energy that the sun produced. Now, many people complained about Rey beating Kylo in their first fight, but this was very, very obviously the Force at work. She even says, "the Force," as she closes her eyes to meditate briefly. Then she lets the Force flow through her and wins the fight. Rey didn't win this fight, the Force did, and the Force is all-powerful, so it totally makes sense. Ever wonder why Leia walked right past Chewie, lifelong friend of her husband, who was just murdered by her son, and Leia ignores him to go hug Rey, a girl whom she had never met before? Well, The Force was so unbelievably powerful in Rey that, according to the novelization, Leia could see Rey visibly glowing, a literal beacon of hope that would bring peace to the galaxy. People complain it was a plot convenience that made R2 wake up at the exact right time to tell them he had the missing part of the map, but it actually wasn't a mistake. Over the past several decades, R2 had grown so close to Luke that the living Force, note this is different, not the regular Force or the cosmic Force, well, the living Force sensed that Luke wasn't going to return on his own, so it woke up his other half, R2, to go save him. Also remember at this point, Rey left Kylo wounded out in the woods on Starkiller base, which exploded shortly after with no other ships other than the Resistance fighters escaping. Well, some idiots complain that Leia should be devastated that her son murdered her husband and then Rey murdered her son. But remember back to how she saw the Force was shining in Rey? Well, that hug gave her a vision which let her know that Kylo was still alive and that one day he would turn back to the good side. Now, some people complained it made Leia look short-sighted and stupid the way she sent off Han to his death. But she actually had a vision of what was going to happen, and she knew she had to sacrifice Han now and sacrifice herself later, because losing both his parents was the only thing that could lead Ben to be redeemed. Ever wonder how Rey knew exactly which island Luke was on? Especially when he was disconnected from the Force, so she couldn't feel him. This one is pretty simple. The map actually pointed to the exact hut he was living in. They just never zoomed in all of the way. We as the audience only saw the zoomed out full picture galaxy setting. Now, I've heard people ask, if Luke was so important and they knew the First Order was going to try to kill him, why not send the entire Resistance with Rey to protect him? Well, in the novel, we actually see Leia start to send an entire squadron to retrieve Luke. But then she suddenly had a vision, showing that Luke was going to come back safe and sound, and all they needed to do was send the new Chosen One. Ever wonder why Chewie and R2 didn't go up to meet Luke with Rey? And why they both stay with the ship the entire time they're on Ahch-To? Well, according to the Telemetricon, the particular variant of salt on that planet was lethal to both Wookiees and droids, so for their own safety, they couldn't risk going outside. Ever wonder how Palpatine transferred his essence before splatting on the floor of the reactor? Well, he had sensed Vader was about to kill him, so he thrust his consciousness far away into the clone body that he had been growing for himself on Exegol. But it turns out the clone was flawed, it had no force powers, and it looked nothing like Palpatine. So he got angry and hired the assassin Ochi to kill his failed clone. But then he found out that the clone had a daughter, and since her father had no midichlorians, Rey received double the average midichlorian count, and was super strong in the Force. So Palpatine decided he wanted to go inside her instead. So Palpatine cloned his original body, but kept it old, so he would appear to be more wise to his daughter. Now, I've seen a ton of people complain about how dense, brainless, and moronic it was for all the ships on Exegol to have been hiding under the ice for the past 30 years, when they're on a terrifying lightning planet that is basically impossible to find. Well, it's actually a pretty disturbing one to dig into. See, while building all these ships over the past 3 decades, they had absolutely devastated the planet, leaving it completely inhospitable. According to the novelization, there were 10,000 Zyston-class Star Destroyers on Exegol, each one crewed by 29,585 people for a total of 295,850,000 crew members making up the Final Order fleet. But remember how the planet was desolated and incapable of producing food? That's why they had to bury the ships in ice, to temporarily freeze all the crew members until the time came to fight, because the only way to feed everyone was resorting to cannibalism. Side note, that's also why you see the big arena where all Palpatine's Sith cultists are gathering and chanting for him. That's the arena where they fight to the death, with the losers being carried straight to the kitchen. That's also how the Sith Eternal thinned the weak from their ranks. Have you ever wondered how the Death Star fragments ended up on this planet, not even in the same system as Endor? Well, when the reactor exploded, it created tears in space and time. The pieces of the Death Star fell through space-time, transported instantly across the galaxy, scattering across many planets. This is a neat little hint about Finn being Force-sensitive they threw in. Check out how he makes Rey's leg move with the Force while she's unconscious. That's also how he managed to survive for so long against a trained lightsaber wielder who was also amped up on pain and the power of the dark side. Did you ever think about the fact that Rey had no idea she's on Starkiller base when she escapes? The novel is fascinating. When she first steps outside, she absolutely freaks out because she thought she was on a ship. Then she has a hilarious scene where she runs around laughing like a little kid because she's never seen snow before and thinks it's the most wonderful thing she's ever seen. Plus, they threw in the cool idea that Finn gave her his jacket because she didn't know what cold felt like before now. Did you know the Knights of Ren purposefully weren't in The Last Jedi? Part of their character trait was that they were really fierce in battle, but exceedingly stupid. That's why they wander around like they're lost for most of Episode 9, and why they were missing through all of Episode 8. Some people complain that Rian spent most of the production budget on the casino planet, that the chase scene went on too long even after half of it was cut out, and that the entire subplot was entirely pointless because it didn't actually help progress the main story or any character's arc in any way. But this was actually a very pivotal sequence, because this was a defining moment for Finn when he realized that slavery was bad. I hate how people complain about the Holdo maneuver. Guys, it only worked because of their experimental shields. Read the books. That's why it was a 1 in a million shot. Not because the odds of it hitting a target were 1 in a million, but because it takes a million hours to manufacture those special shields. Did you ever wonder why Luke is always changing clothes in The Last Jedi? Well, that's actually explained in the novel. See, he puts on his ceremonial Jedi robes every time he tries to burn down the tree and destroy the Jedi texts. At the end of The Force Awakens, he had just had another failed attempt where he was too weak-willed to burn the books. That's why he was standing there brooding, looking over the cliff, because he was so ashamed of himself. Ever wonder exactly how the hyperspace tracking actually works? Well, according to the novel, the computers aren't actually tracking at all. They're doing probability calculations, factoring in all known rebel bases or contacts along that last trajectory. Then the computer guesses where the rebels are likely to come out of hyperspace. Ever wonder how Leia randomly woke up after being blasted unprotected into outer space? Well, according to the dodecahedron, it was actually the Force ghost of the sister possessing Leia's body and guiding her back to the ship. The sister then created a Force bubble and created a Force atmosphere so that Poe could open the door and save Leia without getting sucked into space himself. Then, Leia didn't just randomly slip into a coma. That was actually the strain of the sister leaving her body that caused her to collapse, as she went into a Force hibernation cycle so that she could heal. Ever notice how in the film crawl it says Palpatine just announced himself to the entire galaxy? Well, that happened a fortnight before anyone in the Resistance heard about it, so they needed to confirm rumors they heard from an unknown spy. Ever wonder how everyone remembered and was terrified of Palpatine, even though almost literally no one knew he was a Sith? Especially considering Rey thought Luke was a myth, it makes no sense that people would remember Palpatine, who had dismantled the Senate and was ruling from the shadows. Well, it turns out when Palpatine's first body died in the Death Star reactor, his screams of rage echoed through the Force and traveled with the pieces of the Death Star wreckage out through those time-space warps to planets all across the galaxy, so people everywhere felt his anger and feared his return. Ever notice people complaining about how absurdly lazy the writing was regarding the hyperspace tracking? They went from it being a probability matrix to having an insane jump in technology between episodes 8 and 9, such that the small TIE fighters could now carry the massive computers necessary to accurately track a ship that was randomly skipping through completely random hyperspace destinations. Well, to those idiots, I say that's because the technology did advance. That's what they were gathering Baby Yoda's blood for in The Mandalorian, so they could develop midichlorian hyperspace tracking, which is instant and completely accurate. Side note, it is such an utterly brilliant writing choice to have Kylo call Palpatine's bluff. Remember how Palpatine announces that he has an entire army and is about to conquer the galaxy again? And since Kylo is now Supreme Leader, he doesn't want his reign threatened, so he goes to Mustafar, which is finally starting to grow trees again now that the residual dark side from Anakin and Obi's fight is receding. Then Kylo goes alone to kill Palpatine because he knows deep down that Palpatine won't use the army he says he has. Now, a ton of people talked about how absolutely absurd, how iconically idiotic, how stupendously stupid of a plot device bringing back Han as a ghost was. Remember how non-Force users can't become Force ghosts? Well, it turns out in the first draft of the script, this was actually Leia's Force ghost pretending to be Han. But later they changed it all to have happened inside Ben's head, reinforcing the subplot of his schizophrenia. Now, I am so tired of the obtuse, gullible, insipid morons that complain about the ending, saying the Skywalker and Solo lineages are now dead, long live the Palpatines. Well, if those lazy, incompetent, talentless hacks would just read the extended universe material, they'd see that Rey traveled to the spirit realm with Ahsoka, where she did a Force blood transfer with Luke, so she could be legitimately his daughter, with his bloodline, and continue the Skywalker name. Ever wonder why they had to use that ridiculously big cable to transfer literally a couple sentences to R2? Well, that's part of the encryption that Hux used to hide his message. It was too much complex data to utilize R2's standard Wi-Fi, and it took them so long not because of transfer speeds, but because R2 was running millions of algorithms to decrypt the message. Did you ever think Leia's reason for leaving the Jedi seemed nonsensical and stupid? How she felt stopping her training in the light side was the best way to protect Ben from the dark side? Well, that's actually part of hers and Luke's subplot. The entire point is that she was wrong and she got her son killed, just like Han was wrong and got himself killed, and Luke was wrong and got all his students killed. This wasn't poorly thought out and incompetent, preposterous characterization. It was an intentional plot point that the old characters were failures, and they needed the guiding beacon of Rey's pureness to bring them back to the light. Did you know that according to the book entitled Star Wars: The Secrets of the Jedi, Luke was frequently conversing with his father's Force ghost for 2 decades prior to Luke shutting himself off from the Force? It's a really fascinating plot point that Anakin's ghost actually hated his daughter. That's why when he appeared to Ben Solo, he helped tempt him towards the dark side. Remember how the experienced sailor who owns the boat says it's too dangerous to go out on the ocean at high tide? But if you would just read her backstory, Rey grew up on a sailboat. Guys, she lived on a desert planet. She spent years learning how to sail the sand dunes and navigate the treacherous waves. So have you heard the whiners complaining that there's no door in the throne room in the Death Star and that's an exterior wall? How could there possibly be a room there? Well, you troglodytes, let me break it down for you since you don't feel compelled to read the Midnight Twitter feed where they explain this stuff. That's actually what's known as the World Between Worlds, created by the Force to test those who seek to be the greatest Jedi. That evil version of Rey that she fought was actually a Force manifestation created by Ahsoka to help scare Rey down the right path. And speaking of that scene, ever wonder how Kylo managed to find her since he didn't have the dagger map? Well, that's actually because he's way more advanced in his studies of the Force, so he was able to use the ability Force Dyad Connection to easily retrace the path that she took. Now, a lot of people asked why Palpatine never tried to possess Anakin, or Luke, or Kylo, why he waited for Rey. I mean, he had a young handsome dude right here that he could have possessed, one who would have sacrificed himself willingly in exchange for unlimited power. Well, when you read up on the advanced characterization attributions, you see that Kylo actually had his Force protection maxed out, so he wasn't susceptible to magical attacks. But it's interesting to note that when he loses his stamina and transforms back into Ben Solo, his Force protection points drop to 0, and Palpatine is able to effectively use Force Life Leech on him. Did you realize the subplot that Rey is only powerful around other Force users? That's why she can lift all those rocks, because Leia was there giving her extra power. And why she can use the Force to fly when she's around Leia, but all those other times when flying would help her win a fight, she doesn't do it. Now, some of you nerds are complaining because Rey murdered the people in this transport, but listen, simpletons, that transport Rey blew up didn't have any kidnapped prisoners, just brainwashed child soldiers like Finn. Did you notice that Episode 9 had a subplot that Rey and Poe hate each other? They're both jealous that Finn has another friend. That's why they're both shown arguing after he returns from the spy mission, and why later she refused to heal his blaster wound even though she happily healed a gross slug that tried to kill her, plus that desert snake thing. And what about that beautifully intricate detail of time zones? Remember how Episode 9 has a 16-hour time limit before Palpatine releases his ships? and how Rey was stuck on Ahch-To and had to literally build a ship from parts of Luke's rusted X-Wing and Kylo's burned TIE Fighter. Well, that actually took her 47 straight hours of work, but she knew time moves differently on Ahch-To because it orbits 2 suns, so she knew she would be back in plenty of time to save the day. Here's one of my favorites. Notice how in Episode 9, Chewie lets himself be captured on purpose. The Knights of Ren had close combat metal weapons, which are no match for a Wookiee's strength. Chewie knew that Rey needed to be pushed to access her true power, so he didn't even put up a fight, knowing that she would come and rescue him. Did you notice how Rey had become obsessed with death and getting to talk to Luke and Han again? That's why she spends all of the time trying to train to talk with the dead. That's actually the only reason she's training at all. She was already way stronger than Kylo and beat him before having training from 2 different Jedi. Did you ever notice the feminist subplot, how the Force ghosts refuse to appear to the female? In fact, she spends all of Episode 9 begging them to help her, just like she spent Episode 8 begging Kylo not to be evil. That's the underlying feminist message, how Rey spends the entire sequel trilogy asking people for things and never once does she get what she wants. The symbolism of the evil patriarchy dominating our society. Another aspect of making women look weak was Leia. She died from the strain of just talking across the galaxy so Ben could hear, whereas Luke was able to make a believable projection of himself, because men are inherently far stronger. Did you notice how Force lightning used to be electricity that electrocuted people? But the lightning realized that it was weak, so it evolved, and now it makes people explode. Just like Rey's lightning caused the transport to explode. Except notice how Palpatine's lightning only shuts down the systems on the Armada and doesn't explode them. That's because they planned ahead and all had special dampeners after they saw what Rey's lightning did to the transport. Because Rey grew up uneducated, eating with her fingers, having no friends, she never learned how to properly express emotion. The novel explains that the kiss between her and Kylo was not romantic at all. It was more like she was trying to give him a hug or a high five, but she just didn't know what to do. Rey could have used Luke's and Leia's sabers to train a new generation of Jedi, but since she is secretly Palpatine, she doesn't want the Jedi to come back. It's obvious symbolism for the audience, saying that she wants the Jedi dead and buried. In The Force Awakens, Kylo is fighting in the forest and says, "It is you," when he recognized Rey. This is a throwback to earlier in the film, when that officer said a girl had helped BB-8 escape. It's at this point in the film that Kylo realizes that this girl is a girl too. Rey goes back to live at Luke's destroyed, burned house because Leia told her all about how much Luke loved growing up on a desert planet, and Rey had always loved sand and loneliness. Some people complain that Rey, instead of Leia, went to try to get Luke back. But really, if you're trying to get someone to stop being a hermit, what's the better bait? A dude's 60-year-old sister or a young, beautiful 19-year-old? I mean, Rey went to find Luke because the Force willed it. And this is my absolute favorite. Ever notice the irony of the title Skywalker Saga? You think it's celebrating the Skywalkers, but it's actually about how their family line was an anomaly that needed to be killed off. This series is the celebration of the average person, a completely normal, everyday person who worked hard to take over the galaxy and refused to bow down to a magical chosen one. And as we wrap this up, I hope everyone has realized that this has been an entertaining yet very sarcastic April Fool's special, and the April Fool's part, half of what I said here is actually real canon. Good luck figuring out which is which, because while I wrote it and my crazy ideas, they all just blended together perfectly with what they considered to be canon, so I really have no idea. Anyways, thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time.